Thank you for being here. I mean, giving lecture before lunch is probably one of the worst times for giving lectures. I think the only worst time is giving it right after lunch. So I'm still good. Well, I will not talk for 15 minutes. And I actually have a video to show too. So there will be a little bit of excitement. I want to start by mentioning number 8. Because number 8 in biblical symbolism, and as you know better than I, supposedly represents a new beginning, meaning a new order or creation, and a man's true born-again event when he's resurrected from the dead into eternal life. Number 8, strangely, also appears at significant moments in Slovak history. I don't know if you've known about this, but in Slovakia, we talk about osmičkové roky, the 8 years. I don't know how you say it in English, but the years ending in 8. Like 1918 was the birth of Czechoslovakia. Then in 1938, that was the beginning of the dissolution of the Czechoslovakia. In 1948, the communists took over, February 1948. We just celebrated, 70th anniversary. 1968, the Prague Spring and the beginning of Warsaw Pact occupation. Warsaw Pact occupation. We'll go back to that. 1988, the candle demonstration. 1998, we defeated Mečiar, the totalitarian prime minister. And 2018, right now, last few weeks, I don't know if you followed Slovak news at all, but we've witnessed the biggest mass demonstrations in Slovakia and the Slovak streets and squares since the Velvet Revolution. It's called Zaslušné Slovensko, these massive movements last few weeks, so for decent Slovakia. And it resulted in the fall of Fico's government, although Fico is still in the back, so the result is not certain yet. So the 8 years always brought new beginnings for Slovakia, at least over the last 100 years or so. Unfortunately, not always for the good. And it remains to be seen how these extraordinary events of the last few weeks that awakened new hope, how they will be seen by history. Now, it was yesterday, 25th of March, that we celebrated 30th anniversary of one positive new beginning, the candle demonstration. It was the biggest event of anti-communist resistance in Czechoslovakia since 1968. And I thought it would be appropriate today at this conference on religion and culture to share the story of this event that exhibits an interesting interaction between religion and culture. And I'd also like to use this as a background for a little bit of reflection on the question of the interaction between Christians and public life. So the main question I'd like to raise, with no hope of answering it, is the following. How should a lay political Catholic or Christian engage with today's culture? Is battle the only or the right way, or is there still space, time for constructive engagement and dialogue? More deeply, even if there is no willingness to lead dialogue on the other side, should it not be our norm to come to the political or public arena with love, intelligence, and loving attitude? So this is kind of the background question, or the candle demonstration as an event is an inspiration for me to think about this question a little bit. And the main reason why I want to raise it here is that I believe that we Slovaks have a lot to learn from Poland and from the Polish answer to this question. So perhaps the question as raised may seem irrelevant or wrongly phrased to a Polish ear, I'm not sure. In any case, I think you have much more sophisticated experience with various answers to that question. I'd like to hear your thoughts. I should also like to say that this is not an academic paper. It is rather a very lay description of a historical event. And I said immature, but Michal said he would never say that he did something immaturely. So I'd say lay description of historical event. Although I think Chesterton has a very nice defense of amateurs that I'm very fond of, but that's a different topic. So lay description of historical event and fairly superficial reflection of an enduring problem as Richard Niebuhr called it in his famous book, Christ and Culture. the problem of the interaction between Christ and culture, with the only intention, my only intention is to steer the discussion. My paper will have 3 parts. First, I'll briefly describe the history of the communist persecution of Christians from 1950 to 1988, so 38 years in a few minutes. Then the second part, I'll mention the events leading up to the candle demonstration and the day of the candle demonstration, and I'll show you a short video from the demonstration. And the last part, I'd like to talk about the implications for the current situation of Christians engaging in public life. Okay. So the short history, the first part, the short history. So how many of you are somewhat familiar with the history of persecution in Czechoslovakia, the communist persecution of Czechoslovakia? The Poles are probably, more or less, yes. So sorry to those of you who this will be boring, but maybe for some of you it will be something new. In February 1948, the communists took over Czechoslovakia, despite the fact that the communists lost the last 3 elections in 1946 in Slovakia. Democratic Party won, but despite of that fact, they won in Czech Republic. So they managed through Czech Republic to take control of the whole country in 1948, and of course, they started building the Soviet paradise on earth, and one of the first steps was to destroy the church. They had 3 actions. They called it Action K, R, and P. Action K, April 13th and 14th, 1950, they closed all male monasteries. 2,376 male religious from 28 religious orders were transported to sort of concentration camps. That was April 1950. In August 1950, 720 female monasteries were closed, and 10,660 female religious were interned. And Action P, they liquidated basically Greek Catholic Church. They forcibly unified it with the Russian Orthodox Church. So the male and female religious spent in prison or in concentration camps from spring 1950 to spring 1968, together 42,763 years. I think that's an impressive number. It was fairly brutal persecution in the first, from 1950 to 1960s. So church life was basically reduced to going to church on Sundays. Everything else was forbidden. All the journals were forbidden. All the schools were closed. All the monasteries were closed. Only those priests who got the state approval could say mass. Bishops were imprisoned. Most bishoprics vacant in 1987, so 1 year before the candle demonstration, and we'll return to this point. There was only 1 living bishop in office, so everything else was ruled by vicars. There were, of course, staged trials, imprisonments, and killings of priests, bishops, lay people. The communists organized their own organization of priests called Pacem in Terris, so some priests were members of this. And it was also, the 50s was also the time when the underground church sprang. And it sprang thanks to secret ordinations of bishops and then priests. The most important of which was probably the ordination of young Jan Chrysostom Korec, who of course later became cardinal, but much, much later. So he was a crucial figure for the underground church in Slovakia. Then there was the lay leadership of the underground church, the people who were sentenced to imprisonment in 1950s, and 2 such figures were crucial, Vladimír Jukl and Silvester Krčméry. Both of them spent about 12 to 13 years in prison in 50s to 60 something. And Silvester Krčméry, they're both dead now. They passed away a few years ago. And Silvester Krčméry, he was 32 that he was put in front of the court after being imprisoned and tortured for 2 years. And so this 32-year-old man, this is very inspiring for me when I think about this every time. This 32-year-old man, after being imprisoned and tortured for 2 years, he stood at that court and he delivered his defense speech. And it's heartbreaking, it's mind-blowing, it's unbelievable. I mean, the courage, the power that he had to say what he said then is amazing. And I cannot, of course, deliver the whole speech now, but I'll give you the last few sentences, which, of course, have become the most famous, where he says, I quote, "You have power in your hands, but we have truth. We do not envy you your power, nor do I have any desire for it. The truth is enough for us, for it is greater and stronger than power. Whoever has power in his hands often thinks that he can hide the truth, suppress or kill or crucify it. But the truth has always risen and will rise again from the dead, as it does sometimes even on the third day." So that's the beginning of a huge persecution, the beginnings of the underground church. And now comes the Prague Spring of 1968. Everything seems, nicer, socialism with human face. There's a lot of hope, but that hope is all ended in August 1968 when Warsaw Pact soldiers come. It's 450,000 of them. They invade Czechoslovakia. 94 people are killed, including children. 345 are injured. And then comes the time of what they call the normalization, with Gustav Husak, the famous figure and president, in charge. The persecution of the church is less brutal in the next 20 years. It's not what it used to be in the 50s, but there still is persecution. There still are imprisonments. There still are, they're making life of Christians and believers difficult. But the activity of the underground church continues, and it's mainly focused on building small communities. These two men, Silvester Krčmery and Vlado Jukol, are in the head of it, and they organize small communities of students while they're studying in Bratislava, and then when they leave Bratislava and go back home, they start their own communities there, and it's a growing network of small communities that experience freedom. When they meet, they can pray, they discuss Bible and other issues, and they experience what it means to be free, at least in that, little community. And another interesting figure, from 1948 to 1989, so during the communism, those 40 years of communism, more than 250,000 people were convicted because of political crimes, which, Slovakia has 5 million people. So 250,000 were convicted of political crimes of some reason. It's a huge number. So the underground church, again, focuses on building small communities. And here I'd like to quote Cardinal Korec, who says, at one point he said, "They can take many things away from us, our literature, samizdats, and so on, but they cannot take away our little communities of young people. We cannot retreat behind this line." To me, that's, again, very inspiring, that the church realized that it's in the little communities that important things happen. It's the little invisible things that matter. And these invisible things eventually lead to what I want to talk about now in my second part, the candle demonstration. What happened before, to give you a little bit of historical context, shortly in 1987, the Christians in Czechoslovakia and the underground church felt more and more kind of self-confident. And they organized the biggest petition in history of Czechoslovakia, where they collected 500,000 signatures, half of which came from Slovakia, half from Czech Republic, with 31 requirements. It was very kind of anti-communist, 31 petitions. And signing that petition meant that you can be persecuted. But 500,000 people had enough courage to actually sign it. So everyone was surprised. It was a huge thing. And it happened partly thanks to this wonderful network of people of the underground church that had been built for the last 20 years, since 1968. It also happened thanks to the help of Voice of America and the Vatican Radio that were, the only kind of free news that you could hear. Then in 1987-88, the Pope John Paul II declared the Year of Mary, which was an occasion for the official church to organize a lot of Marian pilgrimages and other events, and the underground church kind of joined in them, and there was a sense of spiritual unity. Mary is very important for Poland and Slovakia. Mary of Seven Sorrows is the patroness of Slovakia. So that Year of Mary, from what I studied from the witnesses of these people, meant a lot to them. It meant a lot to them that it's happening. And then came a very modest encouragement from the World Congress of Slovaks. Marian Šťastný, the head of the World Congress of Slovak, planned demonstrations in front of the foreign embassies on 25th of March. He wanted to demonstrate for religious freedom in front of the foreign embassies. And so he sent a note to Jan Čarnogórsky in a chocolate. He received a chocolate, and when he opened the chocolate, there was a note. Why don't you join our efforts on 25th of March? So on March 6th, 1988, the leaders of the underground church met in Bratislava. And František Mikloško, another towering figure of the underground church, suggested then, on March 6th, that they organize a demonstration in unity with the World Congress of Slovaks. The idea was to get together for 30 minutes with candles. Nothing else but silent prayer and lit candles. Now, when he suggested it, so I read in his memoirs, the room was quiet. Because everyone suddenly, and everyone realized what this could mean. And nothing like that happened. No public demonstration against the power of the state as yet. Yes, petitions, that was a big thing, but no one ever went to the streets. And here suddenly there was a suggestion, let's go to the street. Let's go to the squares. So there was quiet, and suddenly one of them said, Sviečku a chuť mám. In English, I have a candle and a desire to go. And that broke the ice. I have the candle, I can go. And so they decided they were going to do it. So they officially announced the demonstration to the authorities. Of course, the authorities forbade, and then they appealed. So on the day of the demonstration, I think the appeal was either ongoing or already decided, I don't know. But they did it on purpose in such a way that it couldn't be officially prohibited definitely. So they announced it. Of course, the communist authorities did everything they could to prevent it. They organized massive anti-demonstration measures. They closed schools. They sent university students. They had mandatory vacation on that day. They stopped some buses going to Bratislava, trains going to Bratislava. They organized propaganda against the demonstration, even by some priests who were saying this is wrong, this is abusing the religious sentiment, whatever. And I should also say in announcement of the demonstration, they petitioned for three things. The demonstration petitioned for three things: free appointment of bishops without state interference, full religious freedom, and complete guarantee of civil rights in Czechoslovakia. So especially the third was interesting because the underground church asked not only for its own agenda, so to speak, not only for appointment of bishops and religious freedom, but they asked and petitioned for full guarantee of civil rights in Czechoslovakia, so for rights for everyone. When I read the state propaganda against the candle demonstration then, and I compared it with Fico's propaganda against the demonstrations that are going on in Slovakia right now, it was exactly the same three reasons that both the communist and the Fico used. I mean, Fico is a sort of a communist, but it's still interesting to notice that the first reason was that it's organized by the evil West. That was the first reason. Secondly, it's politically motivated. They have political ambitions. That's supposedly the worst thing that can happen. The organizers have political ambitions. What are you doing there? I mean, I don't get it. But the communists did the same thing. It's politically motivated, right? And the third, then it was abusing religious sentiment. Today, it's abusing the death of the journalists who were murdered. And the demonstration in Slovakia started as a result of murders of two young people, 27-year-old people. One of them was a journalist. So supposedly some things never change. Okay, so the communists did everything they could to prevent huge demonstration. They closed the streets leading to the square at certain hour of that day. They closed the streets so that you cannot actually enter the square. So only those people who already were there could participate in the demonstration. So it ended up that there was about 2,000 to 3,000 people on the square and extra 5,000 to 8,000 people in the neighboring streets, despite all their attempts. It started at 6 o'clock and lasted until 6:30. Started with national anthem and Vatican anthem. And the communist leadership was in the neighboring hotel watching what was happening and giving orders. And they sent, as you will see soon, police cars. There was civil police, armed police, water cannons, beating, arresting. One person was sentenced to prison later, a year later. Many were severely injured. And this is the time to show you a short video from the demonstration that was filmed by communists. It's not high quality, but it gives you a feel a little bit. It was a very rainy day, so that's why the people have. Thank you. You might have understood, well, the Poles might have, that at one point they say, the lady in blue has to be arrested. The lady in blue has to be arrested. Of course, you know, there are different interpretations of who the lady in blue was. All right, so my third and last part is a short reflection on current situation of Christian engagement in Slovakia, Christian engagement with public life. Are there lessons to be learned from this event 30 years ago? Or what's the situation of Christians in Slovakia today? Now, it seems to me that there are two extreme types of publicly active Christians in Slovakia. I'm speaking about Slovakia, right? I don't know much about the other countries. On one side, there are those who speak about Christianity favorably, but generally despise tradition and hierarchy. They are friends with liberal mainstream and do not want to push Christian agenda because they probably believe there is none. There is just one common agenda of decent Slovakia. Christianity is a welcome enrichment of private life, but has minimal role in the public life. In fact, it's dangerous to try to bring it to the public. I call this side salt without taste. I don't know if you have them elsewhere, but I think we do have them in Slovakia. On the other extreme, I think, there are those, and this is more controversial maybe, who would prefer jumping into the tanks if they could. They love the language of culture war. They usually exert single-issue political pressure against some evil, abortion, same-sex marriage, gender ideology, Istanbul Treaty, that's a big thing in Slovakia these days. Their actions seem to be motivated by fear of liberalism and evil West. They don't see a point in discussion. Rather, they want to generate power while still possible and use it for stopping the evil. They usually use the same political and marketing methods as their enemies, usually not as successfully though. And they divide people into two camps, we and them. I call them cultural warriors. Now, I believe that none of these extreme types represent authentic Christian response to the public life. It seems to me that candle activism is the only authentic Christian response. It's the middle ground between the two extremes of the salt without taste and the cultural warriors. What are its main features? And I think there are several, and let me mention a few of them. Strong living faith, focus on Christ and presentation of truth in the public regardless of popularity, reasonable methods of presentation. Here, the organizers of this demonstration, for example, judged that it was not reasonable to have anyone try to speak. Someone from the West asked them, so who is going to speak at the demonstration? And their response was, no one. And then after the event, they got the message saying, well, sure, I mean, the candles spoke more loudly than any words that would have been spoken there. Loving manifestation of truth, refusing hate, offering forgiveness, praying for the salvation of its enemies. These people at the demonstration, while the demonstration was going on, they were appealing to the conscience of the policemen and the secret agents. It was interesting. They spoke, I think, speaking the language inspired by gospel, but understandable to non-believers and enemies. Focus on the common good of the whole, not only on one particular group. Endurance, despite persecution, and overcoming fear of the enemy. So it seems to me that these are some of the features when we want to be the true salt of the earth, the light of the world. All this can be summed up in one message that Anton Neuwirth articulated as his life's mission: healing evil with love. Maybe a short parentheses, who was Anton Neuwirth? Probably unknown figure for most of you. I work for the Collegium Antona Neuwirtha, so I work under his image, and he's a saint in my eyes. He was a medical doctor who was sentenced to prison for 12 years as a father of 4 children. His oldest daughter is Anna Záborská, member of European Parliament, one of the major pro-life figures in Europe. He was later the honorary chairman of Christian Democratic Movement after the revolution and our first Slovak ambassador to the Holy See, good friend of John Paul II. I met him personally, and that's why I founded the Collegium and named after him. Now, it's obvious that the healing evil with love approach differs from the salt without taste, in that it sees social evil that requires healing, and healing will not happen without sustained effort. Thus, the one who wants to heal evil has to be prudent in order to identify the evil, just in order to decide to heal it, brave in order to overcome obstacles, and temperate so that he doesn't overkill it. We see all the cardinal virtues present in the public act of the candle demonstration. This approach also differs from the cultural warrior in that its main motivation, drive, and aim is Christian love, not victory over enemies. It's love for God, church, human beings, and their common good. Love precludes repaying evil with evil or using evil means to achieve a good end or caring only for your own community and its interest. Now, this is all nice and sweet, but is it realistic today? What does this all mean today when we don't live in a totalitarian state anymore? What should candle activism look like in everyday politics and public engagement of Christians? Isn't it naive to suppose that this approach is the norm for Christians? Isn't it self-defeating? I don't have answers to these questions. I just believe that healing social evil with love has always been and will continue to be the norm and challenge for Christians. Unfortunately, I don't see strong examples of this approach among Slovak Christians right now, although there is hope. Paradoxically, now the recent mass demonstrations that I've mentioned have manifested this approach better than any Christian engagement in public life for many years. Their slogan was "For Decent Slovakia." They were organized, these mass demonstrations, by young people and students without personal ambitions. They were motivated by the desire to heal the evil of corruption that murdered not only the 2 young people, but has been harming our common good for very long. No politicians were allowed to speak at the demonstrations. No violence has occurred, despite the fact that more than 100,000 people gathered all around the country in the squares. If you compare proportionately the number of people, it would have to, in Poland, it would have to be 1 million Poles in the streets to have the same proportion. So, I mean, for Slovakia, it was huge. Surely, now the organizers and people gathered around, including Christians. One of the organizers is an alumnus of the Collegium of Anton Neuwirth. I'm proud of him. And in fact, a few priests appeared at the stage. However, religion is not seen as a unifying thread in Slovakia anymore. It's more like it's a divisive thing. So the demonstrations did not mention God and or religion at all. Is it a problem? I don't know. Perhaps not. Perhaps it's better to have political action that's Christian in its content, though not in its form, and our appearance than the contrary. But I may be wrong. perhaps it's not sustainable. To conclude, the example that the underground church gave to Slovakia and the world during the candle demonstration, I think, was an incarnation of the ever-valid norm of Christian engagement with culture, the norm that requires Christians to heal all evil with true, authentic caritas. This norm is very high and difficult to achieve, and therefore hard to incarnate in everyday practical politics. But if it is true that it is our norm, then it is our challenge, and it is the challenge of our generation to find ways how to incarnate that norm again and again. Thank you for your patience.
Thanks, Martin, and thanks that you also show that you are part of that story. We have several questions and several minutes to address those questions. Please.
Everyone who's asking and answering questions, speak into the mics. We're recording this for posterity, and it's the only way we can get it on video.
Thank you very much. That was really, really interesting. After the candle vigil, were there any more militant responses from the public? Because there were very violent scenes that the authorities were using against the people who were standing in vigil. I just wondered if there was any more violent responses from the people towards the authorities after in your reaction to that?
No. You mean on March 25th, 1988?
Yeah, or in response to that specific?
No.
Good. Okay.
And this became the news all around the world. Right? The candle demonstration, it was noticed by the world media. Everyone was writing about it, and of course, some people say that this was, kind of our first step that led to the valid revolution of 1989. But yeah, if you're asking whether the people reacted the government in violent way, no.
Good. Thank you.
My voice is just only as a very, very little correction of your words, of your sentence, that you repeated many, many times. I don't agree with the sentence, healing the evil with good, with the good.
With love.
With love, okay. No, the evil should be eliminated, overcome, eliminated. But the society, the humans, the human souls, they should be healed. The evil, not the evil. We don't want to heal the evil. We want to eliminate evil. Thanks.
Right. I mean, I guess we agree in some sense. The aim of that message is that there is no more evil. But the question is, how do you get rid of evil? And the message is that the only way to get rid of evil that doesn't really have its substance, right? Evil is just a lack of good. The only way, if you're using evil to confront evil, you're just getting into the spiral of evil that never ends. So the message, Neuwirth's life's message is that we have to love the people. We have to fight evil with love. That's the only way, because we're bringing good where there is no good, right? That's the only way to heal evil. And in his life, I mean, this man, to me, it's incredible. I mean, after 6 years in prison, as a father of 4 children, who hasn't done anything wrong. In fact, he was arrested on an academic ground. He was a medical doctor starting a faculty in Košice. He never hated any of the prisoners or the systems, and he taught his children never to hate anyone. In fact, there's one story when one of his prison guards took his son while Neuwirth was still in prison. He met his son somewhere. He took him and he told his son, "You just be like your father." So he evangelized even in prison. He was a medical doctor, so he served as a doctor in prison, and he was healing communists, non-communists, bishops, anyone without any distinction. He was always trying to make sure that people, when they're dying, have a chance to, if not say a confession, then at least say to him. He was always present there, and all his life, even after he returned from prison, he was always put down by someone. you know, even when he was the ambassador to the Holy See, Mečiar called him back for consultations, and he had to stay and remain in Bratislava for over a year. But he never hated anyone, and that's kind of that's his message. And I think it's difficult. My goodness, it's difficult to forgive people who hate you.
Okay, so let us collect like 4 questions in one row, and then you address them, and that will be the final answer. Okay.
So I thought that was really interesting and persuasive. Really interesting and persuasive. I wanted to ask as an open question. So you've given us this very striking example of the kind of it's a very famous and celebrated example of the kind of activism that you're or political action that you admire, and then you've said that actually that hasn't been followed through on the whole in post-communist Slovakia, and the country has had a very troubled political history, and in particular, the Christian politics hasn't worked out that way. So I was just wondering if you could tell us a bit more about what went wrong, because just naively, one might think that with such striking examples to work with, that would be a very good way of starting a tradition of the kind of political action that we're talking about.
Thank you.
Let us take more questions. Andrew Vincent.
Thank you. That was very inspiring and wonderful. That's the first thing. Second, I'd like you to have your advice about dealing with cultural Marxism. Marxism in the old-fashioned sense, of course, generated scarcity and problems. So in some ways, the evils are more apparent. Today, certainly in my country, and many others, we deal with abundance. The evils are more hidden. So they're rotting the souls, but of course, you can be with drugs or video games. It can be quite pleasurable to have your soul rotted. So, any thoughts about how we tackle this? Love to know.
Thank you. 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Tomasz Domagowski, and then Oleg Kindi, and then.
Okay. Short question. What do you think about the future concerning the legacy of traditional, like of the persons like Jan Czarnogórski, for example? Do you believe that this kind of Christian democratic movement has the future in Slovakia, or rather not? Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you.
And last question by Oleg Kindi.
I was recently at a meeting with the president of Austria that visited Lviv, our university, and one of the things that he said, the president of Austria, that he knows almost nothing about Ukraine. I mean, to say this is that there is very little knowledge in Western Europe of different stories that take place in Poland, in Slovakia, so I was very pleased to hear this example, and I think these stories have to be told more broadly. And my question is, do you know of an international kind of communication besides what you mentioned, the Slovak League that kind of existed worldwide, but among the Catholics? I think some of the similar developments took place in Poland, took place in Ukraine, took place in Croatia, I suppose. And so do you know the names or these usually personal connections that really linked and shared these ideas and really transmitted this kind of Central European, Eastern European know-how of building resistance to this evil empire?
Yeah, thank you for a wonderful question. I apologize, I spoke longer than I thought. I thought we would have more time for discussion, because they would be much more interesting to hear your thoughts on these questions than mine. But, well, let me try. What went wrong after the candle demonstration? Now, to be fair, we had a strong Christian Democratic Party in parliament and influencing politics for a long time. In the last elections 2 years ago, it was the first time that they didn't get to the parliament. So we're now kind of in a new phase. Perhaps that's also why it inspired this question. So we did have the underground church and its leaders did have some political influence and representation in the Christian democratic movement. Founded by Jan Czarnogórski, and Franciszek Mikloško was a member. But I mean, this is a whole long story of what happened, and I don't want to go into that. This party had like 4 divisions. So studying this party, you can kind of see how Christians, when they're not united, and how easily they kind of divide. But there was at least in the first important years, and the fight against Mečiar would not have happened victoriously if it wasn't for Christian Democrats. So there was some follow-up, there was some political influence. We're now at the time when it seems to have run out. We lost, the generation of the underground church is gone, and the question is, who's going to take the lead now? Who is going to carry the štafeta? Torch was going to carry the torch. How to fight culture Marxism.
Maybe you should carry the torch, Martin.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I hope our students will, maybe. Well, it's difficult to know what to do sometimes in life, right? I agree. I think that the problem, in some sense, it was much easier for the leaders of the underground church to know what to do, right? It was the enemy was clear. They knew that this is good. We're good. They're bad. I mean, it was a much simpler world in some sense, and now we live in a world that's much more complex and complicated. And I think part of that complication naturally leads to some people wanting it to be black and white again. The culture, to me, in my mind, the culture warrior types are people who are kind of feel much more at ease with the black and white world. But unfortunately, I think today it's not black and white, it's complex, and perhaps I believe that this is a challenge for education, and that's why I'm in education business. I think that forming young people, educating young people is the key to our future, and partly because I think prudence is what this time needs more than the previous time, perhaps. The previous time, I think courage was the virtue of the day. I think we need prudence today more. Legacy of Jan Czarnogórski and others. It's Jan Czarnogórski, this very difficult, complex figure. He's a big pro-Putin fan today. I mean, this is a strange thing that has happened in his life. This big leader of underground church and candle demonstration is now defending Putin and Russian politics in Slovakia. I don't know. But there are others, of course. There are others who, like Franciszek Mikloško. Franciszek Mikloško is a retired man now, but I think as a figure, as a symbolic figure, he's still present and important. But does Christian democracy have a future in Slovakia? I don't know. That's again coming back to the first question: who is going to carry the torch? The party itself is kind of on the verge of getting to the parliament or getting away, but it's just a party. The question is whether those ideas, whether that movement, whether the Christians in Slovakia and Catholics especially find a political representation. But because nowadays there are Christians in all the parties, which in some sense is good, right? But again, we could have discussed this. What's a better strategy? What's more prudent? Is it better that they're in one party or that they're kind of everywhere but nowhere? I don't know. It's difficult. And to Oleg's question, there surely was communication between Solidarność and the underground church. I mean, they helped each other a lot. I think we got a lot of books from Poland. It was much freer, right? So they brought the books through the border and spread it. Czarnogórski appears in one picture with, I forget where I saw it, somewhere recently. So there was a lot of communication with Poland. There was communication with Russia in that they would travel regularly to Russia and evangelize at certain parts. But I don't know to what extent they communicated about, you know, the anti-communist fight. But it'd be interesting. Someone should do a study on comparing the Solidarność and the Slovak and the Ukrainian kind of fight against communism. Someone should do that because there are definitely many, you know, common features, and whether they just kind of organically were formed or whether they influence each other and to what extent. Someone should do that study. Maybe you should ask a student at your university. You have PhD students there, right? We don't. So yeah, thank you very much for your questions.